He was a good fellow, but his rejoicing at the one little part in which he was officially interested of so great a tragedy was an object lesson in the limitations of sympathetic understanding. He did not remain long, but said he would look in later in the day and see Lord Godalming. His coming, however, had been a certain comfort to us, since it assured us that we should not have to dread hostile criticism as to any of our acts. Arthur was expected at 5 o'clock, so a little before that time we visited the death chamber. It was so in very truth, for now both mother and daughter lay in it. The undertaker, true to his craft, had made the best display he could of his goods. There was a mortuary air about the place that lowered our spirits at once. Van Helsing ordered the former arrangement to be adhered to, explaining that as Lord Godalming was coming very soon, it would be less harrowing to his feelings to see all that was left of his fiancée quite alone. The undertaker seemed shocked at his own stupidity, and exerted himself to restore things to the condition in which we left them the night before, so that when Arthur came, such shocks to his feelings as we could avoid were saved. Poor fellow, he looked desperately sad and broken. Even his stalwart manhood seemed to have shrunk somewhat under the strain of his much-tried emotions. He had, I knew, been very genuinely and devotedly attached to his father, and to lose him, and at such a time, was a bitter blow to him. With me he was warm as ever, and to Van Helsing he was sweetly courteous, but I could not help seeing that there was some constraint with him. The professor noticed it too, and mentioned it to me to bring him upstairs. I did so, and left him at the door of the room, as I felt he would like to be quite alone with her, but he took my arm and led me in, saying huskily, "You loved her too, old fellow. She told me all about it, and there was no friend had a closer place in her heart than you. I don't know how to thank you for all you have done for her. I can't think yet." Here he suddenly broke down, and threw his arms round my shoulders, and laid his head on my breast, crying, "Oh, Jack, Jack, what shall I do? The whole life seems gone from me all at once, and there is nothing in the wide world for me to live for." I comforted him as well as I could. In such cases men do not need much expression. A grip of the hand, the tightening of an arm over the shoulder, a sob in unison, are expressions of sympathy dear to a man's heart. I stood still and silent till his sobs died away, and then I said softly to him, "Come and look at her." Together we moved over to the bed and lifted the lawn from her face. God, how beautiful she was! Every hour seemed to be enhancing her loveliness. It frightened and amazed me somewhat, and as for Arthur, he fell to trembling, and finally was shaking with doubt as with ague. At last, after a long pause, he said to me in a faint whisper, "Jack, is she really dead?" I assured him sadly that it was so, and went on to suggest, for I felt that such a horrible doubt should have life for a moment longer than I could help, that it had often happened that after death faces become softened and even resolved into their youthful beauty, that this was especially so when the death had been preceded by an acute or prolonged suffering. It seemed to quite do away with any doubt, and, after kneeling beside the couch for a while, and looking at her lovely and long, he turned aside. I told him that he must be good-bye, as the coffin had to be prepared, so he went back and took her dead hand in it, and kissed it, and bent over and kissed her forehead. He came away, fondly looking back over his shoulder at her as he came. I left him in the drawing-room and told Van Helsing that he had said good-bye. So the latter went to the kitchen to tell the undertaker's men to proceed with the preparations and to screw up the coffin. When he came out of the room again, I told him of Arthur's question, and he replied, "I am not surprised. Just now I doubted for a moment myself." We all dined together, and I could see the poor Art was trying to make the best of things. Van Helsing had been silent all dinner time, but when we had lit our cigars, he said, "Lord." But Arthur interrupted him. "No, no, not that, for God's sake. Not yet, at any rate. Forgive me, sir. I did not mean to speak so offensively. It is only because my loss is so recent." The professor answered very sweetly, "I only use that name because I was in doubt. I must not call you Mr., and I have grown to love you. Yes, my dear boy, to love you as Arthur." Arthur held out his hand and took the old man's warmly. "Call me what you will," he said, "and I hope I may always have the title of a friend. And let me say that I am at a loss for words to thank you for your goodness to my poor dear." He paused a moment and went on. "I know that she understood your goodness even better than I do, and if I were rude or in any way wanting at that time you acted so—" "You remember," the professor nodded. "You must forgive me." He answered with a grave kindness, "I know it was hard for you to quite trust me then, for to trust such violence needs to understand, and I take it that you cannot trust me now, for you do not yet understand, and there may be more times when I shall want you to trust when you cannot, and may not, and must not yet understand, but the time will come when your trust shall be whole and complete in me, and when you shall understand as though the sunlight himself shone through. Then you shall bless me from first to last for your own sake, and for the sake of others, and for her dear sake, to whom I swore to protect." "And indeed, sir," said Arthur warmly, "I shall in all ways trust you. I know and believe you have a very noble heart, and you are Jack's friend, and you are hers. You shall do what you like." The professor cleared his throat a couple of times as though about to speak, and finally said, "May I ask you something now?" "Certainly." "You know that Miss Westenra left you all her property?" "No, poor dear, I never thought of it." "And it is all yours, and you have a right to deal with it as you will. I want to give me permission to read all Miss Lucy's papers and letters. Believe me, it is no idle curiosity. I have a motive of which, be sure, she would have approved. I have them all here. I took them before we knew that was all yours, so that no strange hand might touch them, no strange eye look through words into her soul. I shall keep them if I may. Even you may not see them yet, but I shall keep them safe. No word shall be lost. In the good time I shall give them back to you. It's a hard thing I ask, but you will do it, you will not, for Lucy's sake?" Arthur spoke out heartily, like his old self. "Dr. Van Helsing, you may do what you will. I feel that in saying this I am doing what my dear one would have approved. I shall not trouble you with questions till the time comes." The old professor stood up as he said solemnly, "And you are right. There will be pain for us all, but it will not be all pain, nor will this pain be the last. We and you too, we most of all, my dear boy, will have to pass through the bitter water before we reach the sweet, but we must be brave of heart and unselfish, and do our duty, and all will be well." I slept on the sofa in Arthur's room that night. Van Helsing did not go to bed at all. He went to and fro, as if patrolling the house, and was never out of sight of the room where Lucy lay in her coffin, strewn with the wild garlic flowers, which sent, through the odour of lily and rose, a heavy and overpowering smell into the night. Mina Harker's Journal, 22nd of September. In the train to Exeter, Jonathan sleeping. It seems only yesterday that the last entry was made, and yet how much between them and Whitby and all the world before me, Jonathan away and no news of him. And now married to Jonathan, Jonathan a solicitor, a partner, rich master of his business, Mr. Hawkins dead and buried, and Jonathan with another attack that may harm him. Some day he may ask me about it. Down it all goes. I am rusty in my shorthand. See what unexpected prosperity does for us. So it may be as well to freshen it up again, with an exercise anyhow. The service was very simple and very solemn. There were only ourselves and the servants there, one or two old friends of his from Exeter, his London agent, and a gentleman representing Sir John Paxton, the president of the Incorporated Law Society. Jonathan and I stood hand in hand, and we felt that our best and dearest friend was gone from us. We came back to town quietly, taking a bus to Hyde Park Corner. Jonathan thought it would interest me to go to the Row for a while, so we sat down, but there were very few people there, and it was sad-looking and desolate to see so many empty chairs. It made us think of the empty chair at home, so we got up and walked down Piccadilly. Jonathan was holding me by the arm, the way he used to in the old days before I went to school. I felt very improper, for you can't go on for some years teaching etiquette and decorum to other girls without the pedantry of it biting yourself a bit. But it was Jonathan, and he was my husband, and we didn't know anybody who saw us, and we didn't care if they did. So on we walked. I was looking at a very beautiful girl in a big cartwheel hat, sitting in a victoria outside of Giuliano's, when I felt Jonathan clutch my arm so tight that he hurt me, and said under his breath, "My God!" I am always anxious about Jonathan, for I fear that some nervous fit may upset him again, so I turned to him quickly and asked him what it was that disturbed him.